And I just want to start one question, if the audience will allow me, then we'll open it up straight away. How do you see the connection between these two engines, finance and surveillance? Because you present, one very powerful engine shaping and reshaping space. And then you present it towards the end, the surveillance structures, watching what's happening. But clearly there's a connection, and I just wonder in your mind, in terms of DNA and engines, how you articulate that.
Shall I? Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a great question. Actually, they're not interconnected. They're not interconnected if I use that language. This is finance, this is surveillance. They're interconnected at some other level. I don't know what that level is, but I'm going to go digging. Because I do a first take in this Expulsions book, that there is this deeper, these conceptually subterranean trends. But we have elements. So one category that I develop in this book is this notion of predatory formations, not predatory elites. We have those too. But predatory formations, and I come back to this notion of assemblages, the way I used it in the territory book. In other words, not the Deleuzian meaning. I do not locate my theorization in the category assemblage. I need the utility that assemblage represents as a concept, that I can take bits and pieces of established orders and see how they actually reconstitute themselves in partial things. So for instance, there was a time when we could say predatory elites. They still are there. But you could kill the members of a predatory elites and these predatory formations would still be going. One feature of those predatory formations is capture at the top, which I showed with some of the graphs, and finance is enabling that. But finance also has other functions. We need finance, as I said. So we're talking about new types of combinations of partial elements. And the reason I started out with making is that I think we, the vast middle classes, educated, somewhat comfortable, mind you, are becoming a bit poorer, at least, but we don't know how to make anymore. We have really become consumers. Consumers not just of goods, etc., but consumers of our citizenship, consumers of ideas. And so I ask myself, who are the makers today? The makers, I think, slum dwellers know how to make. They have to for survival. Elites, which is not the same as being rich and powerful, know how to make. But the vast middle, we're just consumers of everything. And so I really think that there is a larger political issue, political now in a very, very generic sense, not confined to recognizable political institutions. Am I giving a second lecture? Is that the problem here? But so the key sort of analytic instrument that I use is this notion of predatory formation. So I argue that even if we killed all the super rich, because it is a mixture of technologies, networks, laws, enablements of all kinds, and then the rich, or some other rich, and some other powerful. So it is, and I want to emphasize, I just want to make a final point here, and that is that in my territory book, I asked a question, the big one there, that one, I asked a question, how do we know when you have change in complex systems? And I really spent a lot of time, doing what I called my guerrilla incursions into historiographies. I'm not a historian, right? And I say, it seems to me that often change in complex systems can coexist with the the elements of an old system. But what it does, it is repositions capabilities from an older system into new ways. So for instance, the rule of law was critical for the formation of a recognizable, respectable, etc., national state. Well, the rule of law becomes critical in the epoch of the 1990s with all the transformations, etc. And it served to legitimate a global operational space, say WTO, TRIPS, all of that. And so that, again, a lot of this stuff is easily invisible because we see rule of law, we think it's rule of law. And in fact, it is also acting in, or operative in, the opposite type of system. So to me, these are really collective efforts. I by myself, I'm not going to figure this out. But I think what we're doing right now with globalization, for me, is kindergarten in terms of the scholarship. I'm sorry. I need all those details. But again, it's this issue of the conceptual, and the conceptual, the theory is a way of seeing, and so we are seeing far too little. There is a vast penumbra that, and there are all kinds of people around the world who are doing the digging that needs to be done in that penumbra. But anyhow, that is sort of my take a bit.
So many questions I could ask after that. It's fascinating. Yeah, let's go. We usually go from the back front. Let's go from the front to the back. Just say who you are and ask a brief question, perhaps.
Hello, my name is Rory McInnes-Gibbons. I'm a second-year classics student here at the university. We have really focused on the conceptual and theoretical issues and the complexity that arises in meaning through there. But I come from a language background, and I wonder whether it's the words themselves, whether we need to update the lexicon of the social sciences. And it's a trend that I've seen throughout the economic lectures as well, that the vagaries and the intensely focused and nuanced meanings, that we can't capture them with the lexicon that we're currently employing. So is it as much a theoretical as linguistic?
Do you want to take one question at a time, or should we just get two or three? Or would you like to, because you're tired, aren't you?
Answer, because this is quite specific. I agree, but I think that we also need to see. I'm just very attached to this notion, the Greek notion of theoria, right, which is to see. And I think if we just stay with lexicon, it's not enough. I grew up in several different cultures, and so I am very aware of language, and there are certain things that Italians say, ci vorrebbe un po' di vino. One would want a bit of wine. We would say, let's have some wine. These are totally different cadences. It's in this in-between spaces. That is why I'm so interested in that penumbra. So I really appreciate your comment, and I think you are right. But I also think that we need that added humph, which we call theory, which is a complex, what you cannot see with a naked eye, in other words.
Go on.
Hi.
Or Rajiv.
Yeah.
Who works on finance.
Yeah, but I'm not going to push you necessarily on the finance aspect, but rather I'm really keen to hear more about an alternative conceptual framework, because I think we have been searching. We had this discourse of globalization, which was very trendy, but this didn't really capture the engine, the steam engine of the epoch. And then you have people like David Harvey and others who are trying to categorize in different ways, talking about the new economy, the information economy, financialization, all these different ways of capturing conceptually the overarching trend. And I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about the alternative conceptual framework that you're offering, particularly because this focus on expulsion seems quite interesting to me. The rhetoric that we've been sold on has been on inclusion. So the subprime, for example, is about inclusion. Gordon Brown talking about the asset-owning democracy. The whole notion has been about democratizing finance, allowing the inclusion of more and more when it comes to the developing countries and so on. We have people like Hernando de Soto, who has been picked up by Clinton and going all around the world saying, you don't need aid, you don't need anything. You're sitting on all this land, all this capital. What you're missing is the ability to liquidify it and make it tradable. You don't have property deeds and so on. If you have the right rule of law, the right institutions, you can get an equity loan against your asset and make it into a live capital. So I'm really quite interested to hear what this expulsion discourse has, or how does it challenge our existing categories?
Well, I have to answer these questions right away because otherwise I have to repeat too much. Well, I think that you raise a very important issue. So there are two components to a quick answer. because I'm pursuing all these issues further in this new little territory. So the first one is, and I may not have emphasized that enough at the beginning, that I am looking at my point of inquiry in this particular project was that systemic edge. And I argue that's an extreme condition. It is not the norm. And all that I have described that is negative and contains sort of an expelling of something can coexist, for instance, and I make quite a bit out of this in the book actually, with growth rates as conventionally understood. So, you know, in January 2013, the IMF and the European Central Bank said, oh, Greece is back on track. 1% growth rate. Moody's, that same month, upgrades Greek government debt. So, you know what? It was a genuine, honest statement, but on a shrunken Greek economy, which had expelled like 30% of little businesses, of workers, of how, you know, and so a big issue, my first big chapter is called Shrinking Economies. So a lot of this new growth, and the same thing in the United States, we have growth. Hey, we still have not recovered, you know, the number of jobs that we had before the crisis. So on some of these issues, and that brings me then to the second thing, what crosses the systemic edge becomes conceptually invisible. I mean, we can see it if we wanted to, but it becomes, so the Greek example also serves for that. No? So you say, yeah, there is growth again, but it leaves out all of those which have been expelled. A lot of the unemployment measures, we know that. I mean, just using economics because it's so simple and we're all familiar with the stuff, right? A lot of the unemployment measures, they, certainly in the United States, they are not counting all kinds of people. So the issue is that even tools that are showing us something, you know, that really, what am I not seeing when I take that? So I end this little book, and that is what we're saying, when the spaces of the expelled, and the expelled is not just people, it's space, it's types of economies, etc., become so diverse, even if they are the extreme condition, we need to do research about that. So I don't know exactly what that means, but what I do know is that I'm looking at an extreme case, so extreme that once it crosses that line, I don't see it anymore. It doesn't count, it doesn't appear, you know, it doesn't measure, and hence, you know what, we need to study that other space. Now in that other space we already know something about it, right? The making of new economies, etc., etc. But that's not going to take care of most people. Those are very minimal things. So, but what I didn't say maybe so clearly, that what I focus on is in extreme cases with the assumption that the extreme case makes visible what in its less extreme version is sort of a bit ambiguous, you cannot see. So the heuristic, you know, power of the extreme condition, which, you know, not everybody might agree with that. So this is only a partial answer to your question.
Hello, Matthew David from Sociology. I wrote your question down wrong when you asked what is the search engine of the new epoch. I wrote search engine because I thought that would be the answer.
Oh, the steam engine.
I know you said steam engine, but I wrote down search engine. And I kind of came back to thinking the steam engine of the modern age is probably the search engine. And consequently, I kind of think, well, is this not the era of the epistemic visible? That actually nothing that you'd said was actually invisible to anybody, even conceptually. I think it's just the sheer fact of putting it all together in a practical sense that's missing. It's not the fact that we can't see oligarchs buying up London. It's not that we can't see that foreclosure is massively happening. We can make the connections between water, land grabs, and all other things. It's not really, I don't see the conceptual difficulty. And likewise, on the search engine front, I liked your slides. I'll probably Google them later. You know, it's hyper visible. It's all there. And likewise, you know, is 1 million people signing an official, given access to top secret information? Is that a lot or a little? Because if one of them is Bradley Manning's, well, you might as well bump the figure up to 300 million or maybe 3 billion. So again, I'm just wondering where the invisibility is, because I can go Google this later. It's all there, and I don't know who it is that isn't seeing it.
Yes, that is what you see. But what we're not seeing, that was the whole point, what we're not seeing is what it means conceptually. That is the argument. that we all know that there is poverty, we all know that there is high unemployment, we all know that the Greek economy is in trouble, we all know that there are land grabs. Those are all data that exists. I didn't invent those data. The point is that are we trotting out, are we just seeing, that is the circle of light. What is the other story? So I said about the superprime market, it's not a housing market. It's about urban land, etc. You know, that what are the elements? That is the point, and that is why there is that systemic edge that renders it invisible. The data level that I have access to is not telling us the full story. That is just a part of the story. And that when you put together all these different domains, something is happening. And if you know, I deal with about 100 concrete cases, very different situations. And I want to argue the facts on the ground. So one of my sort of sentences there is, I want to go back to the facts on the ground. I want to de-theorize in order to re-theorize. I think that we need to do that. I'm not saying that that's the only thing we need to do. It's just, this is, as I said, this is a little project, this is a little book. But that is the thing. It comes with a passion. And it comes with a passion that comes out of a certain kind of understanding and engagement with those kinds of issues. And you know what? I mean, yeah, all that data, you can find it. That is why I present it. This is what we share. We share the numbers. The question for me is whether we're missing something. This is the circle of light. And that is what I kept bringing in, that other angle, that other sort of transversal element, raising the questions. It's all in our face. But we may not be seeing some larger trend that is happening. That is all. I mean, thank you for, you know, the attention. I don't mean to be sound. So I grew up in Latin America, so I can get quite intense and passionate about this stuff. But, you know, it's not personal ever.
Okay. Hi, Glider Hernandez in the law school. Thank you, Professor Sassen. I thought that was fantastic. My question is just about how you situate your wider project in relation to, on the construction of meaning, in relation to the epistemic communities that guard and protect the focus, the light, and that are not merely academic, but also either politically invested because of their careers, or ideologically. I was wondering if you could share a few of the methods or techniques or insights that you use to challenge them to reposition that light, as it were, to identify those systemic edges, because there will be resistance, and I'd just be eager to hear about your insights.
Well, I mentioned in passing, you know, the question of the rule of law before, right? So, and that comes back to what I develop in the territory book, a whole kinds of sort of all these categories that are really constitutive, and that are constitutive especially of our understanding, theorizing, empirical research, etc., of the nation state, the working national liberal state, and all of that. And so when I do my work on globalization, I start often, and that is sort of a counter move, with the deep interiority of the national. I go digging deep inside the national to understand the global. And so the Global City was that. Global City, I don't know if anybody has read it. This is a very boring book, mind you. You know, I spent 8 years doing research because I was trying to see something that I knew was going on, but no data was going to help me. And so then comes this conceptual moment that I say, this is what is happening, right? This is one moment in complex trajectories. And so a lot of the way I have worked, also the question of migration, when I do my work on migration, I suspend the category immigrant. It is too thick, too overwhelmingly full of meaning. So one of the things that I do is that I need to find the non-X to understand the X. And that holds for all kinds of things. So national state, so the basic thing, you know, when I started to do the work on the national state, well, the territory book took me also sort of 9 years. Each of my big books took me about 9 years. And so for me, this dominant paradigm that now the language was the national state loses in a global world. I immediately thought something not right here. But that is also partly because my preference is to go to thick, messy environments. So the global city is entering a local setting, thick, messy. There is no good data about cities, and trying to say, where is the global here? I'm smelling it, but I cannot see it. And I don't know what its shape is, I don't know what its conceptual blah blah is, right? And so the same thing with the state. So I went digging inside the state, and then I came up with quite a bit of information about how the executive branch of government has collaborated, stuff that is now absolutely everybody knows this, you know, has collaborated with the big internet, with IMF, WTO, the fact that IMF only wants to deal with the executive branch of government. Then I began to really look at the executive branch of government and its relationship to the implementing of two little provisions that global finance needed to be global. Two little things which were like a 180-degree change, which is privileging control of inflation over job growth. In electoral countries, that's a big deal. And the other one is this notion of, you know, a kind of deregulation, etc., to have a global capital market. So that's just an example. So then I wound up looking more and more into the executive branch of government, coming up with the notion the executive branch of government is a critical actor in the making of this particular global corporate economy we have. And that means that the executive branch of government diverges more and more from legislatures and from the judiciary. Is very ambiguous, it plays very differently in different systems. So I just go digging into this stuff, you know, and I really try to find what are the limits of existing, very persuasive explanations and descriptions. And so I wind up in a place where I say, no, because of corporate globalization, the executive branch of government in sort of liberal states, which can be prime ministerial or presidential, gains power, but it is mostly a privatized, unaccountable power. So when you deregulate and privatize a lot of sectors that were in the public domain, who loses? The legislature. Because oversight functions, you know, out, it's all private. But you know what? The executive branch of government constructs a parallel world of, you know, private, mostly the expertise, you know, the expert panels and all of that. So, you know, you begin to unsettle deep inside, digging there, spending time, detecting. I don't know, that is sort of one partial answer to your question. What I said before about the rule of law. The rule of law still matters a lot, but today it matters to enable the diminishing of the national state sort of version of the rule of law, right? It in fact alters some of the basic principles in order to enable global actors. The other thing that I have always been very interested in, globalization, there is a lot of globalization. There is very little formal global law. When the chips are down, we have two global formal laws. TRIPS and International Criminal Court. The rest, you know, it's sort of, it's neither, you know, there, it's private, there is a lot of privatizing, you know, what Günther Teubner, you know, the Lex Constructionis, you know, and that kind of stuff. I mean, so, you know, I stand back and I say, my God, a lot of these big sort of images that we have, when I go digging, I see a lot of other stuff. And so the same thing with territory. So I have been one of those who have said, we have overemphasized the importance as a site of change, as say a switch towards global whatevers, of national borders. You know, so I'm interested in these systemic edges that operate inside of systems. I think those national borders, their future is assured, frankly. You know, that's not where the action is for me. But, you know, I also started thinking that that's where the action was. And then I do this kind of stuff and I say, but hey, wait a minute. In finance, the black pools, you know, which account for 70% of trading, and not even the black pools is a term of the Federal Reserve, of our central bank. Black pools, what kind of language is that? That is, you would think that a radical lefty would say black pools. And Bernanke, you know, said recently, he said, we don't really know. We think there are about 50. Now, this is major banks, major financial firms, major corporations, major insurance companies. So there are worlds of action that are simply debordering, and they're happening inside. What happens on the interstate borders. Of course, there's a lot of action there, but that's not where the DNA of this epoch is getting shaped. So that's a kind of sort of, you know, I could go on and on, but I really...
I'm very aware it's late, and it's very late. We have, questions have mainly come from the front. Maybe we could just take 2 or 3 quick questions from the middle and the back, and then you could just wrap up, yeah? So go for it.
Well...
Anyone? Yes, there's no one else at the back. Anyone at the back?
It was quite interesting, and I just wanted to know that whether traditional societies who still advocate a lot of anti-consumerism and traditional societies which still advocate a lot of anti-consumerist approach.
Anti-consumer.
Approach, and those who talk about savings, can they think of surviving these monsters the way it has been? Because it's quite scary the way you put it. Yeah.
Just anyone else? Quick question, Ted. Eva?
Anyone?
Anyone? Okay. Anyone at the back? Going, gone. So we leave you just to wrap up.
I don't have a full answer, frankly, but what I do know is that in traditional societies, partly out of the sort of survival spaces, the making of survival spaces, they know how to make a few things that means that they could survive without some of these consumer markets, whereas we would have a very hard time, you know. But I really think those are partly empirical questions. You have to go to the sites and sort of understand, and it's not quite, I mean, I'm very interested in how, you know, working slums are really spaces of making the social, making goods, making sub-economies, you know, all of that. And you know the whole debate in India, for instance, that to free up and to allow the big consumer firms from the West to come in is going to destroy some of those more basic economies, but that are economies that belong to the people, so to say. So I am disturbed about that. Well, I think I sort of have said it all. I don't need to do a final wrap up. And
well, I just thought it was gripping, actually. I've had a great evening. I've enjoyed it very much, and have been completely engaged by what you've said. I mean, I thought it was a very compelling account of how you go about looking in the places that others don't readily see. And I thought it was absolutely intriguing and illuminating, and maybe we have to wait some time before the DNA unfolds and the search engines or engines and their constellations become a little clearer. But I'm very, very taken by that, because, you know, I wrote a very big book in the 1990s called Global Transformations, and the questions I most had at that time was, where's the driving engine? So, you know, we're still thinking about that. All right, many thanks. It was a terrific lecture.